Every book begins before the first sentence. It begins with an irritation, a question, an encounter, or a pattern the writer can no longer leave alone. Across the years, I've written about consciousness, intuition, ritual, narrative, decision-making, identity, and the hidden structures through which human beings make meaning. But a title can tell you only so much. So, in this series, I introduce these books one at a time, not through summaries, not through advertisements, through the questions that made them necessary. This is The Written Unknown, a brief encounter with the books of Dr. Juan Carlos Rey. What if the problem isn't that you can't handle your life? And what if your life is asking you to operate at the wrong rhythm? That question sits very close to the beginning of Temporal Architecture. I wrote this book because I kept seeing people who were capable, intelligent, motivated, and often extremely disciplined begin to deteriorate inside environments they should, on paper, have been able to manage. The usual explanation was capacity. They needed more resilience, better habits, greater discipline, more motivation. But sometimes, none of those explanations fit. The person wasn't incapable. The arrangement was unsustainable. That distinction became structural mistiming. In the framework, structural mistiming describes a mismatch between environmental pacing, demands, and the rhythms through which a person processes, decides, recovers, and adapts. The person may remain perfectly capable. The timing structure becomes incompatible. Think about work. You can have an excellent employee who does extraordinary work when given 90 uninterrupted minutes, but performs terribly when interrupted every 7. You can have another person who thrives on rapid interaction and becomes miserable inside 3 days of solitary project work. The question isn't which one is better. The useful question is what kind of timing allows this person's ability to become available. The same thing happens outside of work. You can love your family and still become depleted by the rhythm of constant availability. You can enjoy your business and still begin hating it when every hour becomes reactive. You can be competent at your job while becoming progressively worse at it because your recovery never catches up with what the work extracts from you. And this is where temporal architecture changes the question. Trait psychology might ask, what kind of person is this? Temporal architecture asks, how is this person adapting under present conditions? Those aren't competing questions. They simply look at very different things. The central proposition of the book is simple. Human beings are rhythmic systems. The environments we inhabit have rhythms too. When those rhythms remain sufficiently compatible, adaptive functioning becomes easier to sustain. When compatibility deteriorates for long enough, strain begins to accumulate. And that means a person can be doing all the right things inside the wrong arrangement. One of the first consequences I describe is recovery debt. This is where I'd ask you to notice something in your own life. Rest and recovery aren't always the same thing. You can spend an entire Sunday on the couch and still wake Monday carrying Friday, because your body may have stopped moving while your mind kept working. The unresolved decision is still there. The difficult conversation hasn't happened. 3 deadlines remain open. You're anticipating Thursday. You're replaying Tuesday. You're physically resting inside psychologically unfinished time. That accumulation begins to create what I call temporal load. Temporal load is the burden of unresolved time itself. Unfinished decisions, anticipation, relational strain, deferred recovery, emotional residue, persistent uncertainty. Eventually, attention narrows, patience falls, creativity contracts, the future starts feeling less like possibility and more like obligation. That matters enormously in business because an exhausted company doesn't always look exhausted. Sometimes it looks busy. Everybody's answering messages, everybody's attending meetings, everybody's working late. The calendar is full, but nothing ever seems finished. One priority replaces another before the first one closes. Managers keep adding urgency because urgency temporarily produces movement. Then leadership sees declining performance and concludes that people need more pressure. Sometimes the system doesn't need more more pressure. It needs fewer open loops. This brings us to one of the most useful ideas in the book, coherence. Coherence doesn't mean you're relaxed all the time. It means cognition, emotion, behavior, interpretation, recovery, and environmental demand remain sufficiently coordinated for you to function well. Pressure itself isn't necessarily the problem. Trouble begins when the parts of the system stop working together. Action outruns recovery. What you believe conflicts with what you're doing. The environment requires a pace you can't sustainably maintain. The future becomes overloaded while the present becomes depleted. I call that desynchronization. And here's where the framework becomes practical. Whether I'm looking at an executive, a team, a relationship, or an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I can begin with 3 questions. Fit. How compatible are the timing demands with the way this person actually works and recovers? Coordination. Are the different parts of the system still working together? And range. How much variation can this person absorb before their functioning meaningfully deteriorates? That third question leads us to adaptive bandwidth. Adaptive bandwidth is the range of changing conditions a person or system can tolerate without losing coherence. Some people adapt across enormous variation. Others perform brilliantly inside a narrower range. Neither is inherently superior. A specialist may outperform everybody in the right conditions and struggle rapidly outside of them. A generalist may absorb more variation, but never reach the same peak under specialized conditions. The question is fit. This changes management. Instead of asking, why can't this employee handle what everyone else handles, you might ask, what kind of variation am I requiring this person to absorb? Instead of asking, why has my team become difficult? Ask, what changed in pace, interruption, uncertainty, recovery, or decision frequency before the behavior changed? Instead of telling yourself, I'm becoming lazy, ask, what has changed in the architecture of my day? Then we reach the 12 decision bodies. These aren't meant to be another personality typing system. They're candidate interpretive architectures. They ask something much more fluid. How is uncertainty being interpreted right now? When circumstances become unclear, do you initiate? Do you stabilize? Do you strategize, interpret, navigate, protect, or observe? Different conditions can bring different interpretive patterns forward. The purpose isn't to lock someone inside a type. It's to notice the pathway from what becomes important to what the person does next. That gives us another question I find useful in business and in ordinary life. What kind of decision maker have current conditions turned me into? Maybe you're usually expansive, but 6 months without real recovery has made you defensive. Maybe your best strategist has become controlling because uncertainty has exceeded their available range. Maybe a thoughtful executive suddenly looks impulsive because every decision now arrives late and urgent. Different states make different decisions. Temporal architecture adds, different architectures make different states easier to enter. And under prolonged strain, something much more troubling can happen. I call it narrative compression. The entrepreneur becomes only a business owner. The caregiver becomes only a caretaker. The executive becomes only a performer. The scholar becomes only a producer. Identity begins losing dimensionality. You stop saying, my business is having a difficult quarter. You begin thinking, my life is failing. You stop saying, I'm exhausted from caregiving. You begin thinking, I exist to carry this. The problem expands until it becomes the entire story. One of the earliest signs that a life is becoming structurally unsustainable may be that you can no longer imagine yourself outside the thing you're trying to manage. That's why temporal architecture isn't, to me, another system for squeezing more productivity out of people. Sometimes the right intervention is to do less. Sometimes it's to sequence differently. Sometimes a team needs fewer meetings. Sometimes a leader needs better information earlier. Sometimes recovery has to occur before the next decision rather than after another 10. Sometimes the work itself is fine and the cadence is destroying the people doing it. The framework has potential uses in burnout analysis, leadership development, organizational design, decision architecture, relationships, performance sustainability, and executive consulting. And I want to be precise about what the book is claiming. Temporal architecture is presented as a theoretical framework and research program. It isn't a medical diagnosis. Its constructs remain open to measurement, testing, revision, merger, or rejection. That intellectual humility is part of the architecture itself. I'm not interested in protecting a beautiful theory from evidence. I'm interested in whether the theory helps us ask better questions. So, here are a few. Where is the pace of your life incompatible with the way you actually function? What are you calling rest that isn't restoring you? Which open loops are making tomorrow feel heavier than it really is? What conditions make your best judgment available? When did your identity begin shrinking around one problem? And perhaps the most useful question of all, are you failing the structure, or is the structure failing you? Because you may not need to become better at carrying your life. You may need to redesign the conditions under which your life keeps asking you to carry it. Temporal Architecture, Human Rhythm, Pressure, Interpretation, and Adaptive States, written by Dr. Juan Carlos Rey, a framework for people, leaders, teams, and organizations trying to understand why capacity sometimes disappears under pressure and what becomes possible when rhythm, recovery, interpretation, and action begin working together again. This is the written unknown, where every book begins with the question that refused to leave.